Hi, this is Heidi Burgess. Today I'm going to continue our conversation of small-scale reconciliation. The third thing I said local, bottom-up, small-scale peace builders and reconcilers have to do is to develop a unifying vision of society and a path of how to get there. We've already covered this in considerable detail in Unit 2, so I won't go into as much detail here. But a few things are worth mentioning. In Unit 2, I didn't make a big deal about the difference between small-scale bottom-up reconciliation processes and large-scale top-down ones. But in my head, when I made the perspective reconciliation video, I think I was thinking large-scale top-down. So let's consider what would be different if you did this at a smaller scale, perhaps even at the interpersonal scale. I know I said at the beginning of the course that I wouldn't deal with the interpersonal level, but there are several people in the course who are interested in that, so I've begun to think about it too. Let's review the key ideas from that video. I started out by talking about Ibrahim Rasool's idea of starting with the end. That makes sense at all levels. When you're in an interpersonal conflict, you need an image of what you want. Do you want to reconcile? Or do you want to break up? Is the relationship worth saving? What would reconcile mean? What needs to be different to make a good relationship? If you decide the relationship is worth saving, then you need to figure out how to go about doing that. What's the path from where you are now to that good relationship that you desire? Starting with the end is also valuable at the community level, although there, breaking up is likely not an option. So then you have to move into Rasool's first idea, that the community belongs to all who live there. So you have to work together to figure out what the people in the community want, and how to accomplish that. That requires some sort of a community visioning process. You read in Unit 2 about Jay Rothman's action evaluation process in Cincinnati, Ohio, where the whole community came together to re-envision police-community relations. That was a very long, very time and money-intensive process. But they don't have to be that way. When I was just starting out in the conflict resolution field way back in the 1980s, I was working with a mediation firm called Accord Associates. That was a time when energy development was booming in the West. Oil and gas particularly, but also coal was being developed rapidly in an effort to make the U.S. energy independent. That's because we had recently suffered through two serious oil shortages that caused mile-long lines at gas pumps and reduced factory production considerably. So we wanted to become independent of Mideast oil. Many towns in Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah were rich with coal, oil, and natural gas, so they started booming. Some were seeing their populations double or even triple in the course of a year or less. They didn't have the infrastructure to support such a boom. Not enough housing, schools, supplies of everything were stretched thin. And not surprisingly, there was considerable conflict between the oil and gas workers and the locals, who most often were farmers and ranchers. While some of the farmers and ranchers welcomed the energy development, thinking that it would bring revenue to a struggling area, many were very much against the newcomers, fearing a change in their rural way of life. Some didn't even know that they didn't own the mineral rights below their lands, and they were stunned when oil developers showed up, claiming that they had the right to drill in the farmers' pastures. We worked in about 4 communities in each of the 3 states. Price, Utah, pictured here, was one of them. In Price, there was coal up in those hills. We interviewed people individually to find out both their concerns about what was going on at the time, but also their hopes for the future. After collecting information from town leaders and regular citizens, including old-timers and newcomers, we prepared a report about what the issues were and what people's hopes and aspirations seemed to be. We then held a series of workshops in each community where we presented what we had found, and then we facilitated small group discussions that took the general ideas we presented, refined them, and worked to develop pathways over which the towns might be able to pursue their desired futures. The local governments took it from there. The whole project in all 12 communities lasted about a year, or maybe 2, I don't remember for sure. But his budget was probably 1/10 what the Cincinnati budget was, and the time commitment from the locals was way less too. But the process still helped people in all of these communities plan for a more stable future, and it improved relationships. Unfortunately, it didn't help several years later when oil prices dropped precipitously and all the boom towns turned into bust towns, but that's another story. What other processes are useful for envisioning at the small scale? I like Elise Boulding's envisioning workshop model, which you learned about in the Unit 2 exercise. That can be done individually or in groups of 2. But if you're focusing on reconciliation at the societal level, as you did for that exercise, in the real world, you'd want to get many more than 1 or 2 people involved. You need processes that engage people across the country, perhaps using a process related to the one Jay Rothman used in Cincinnati. But if you're focused on a small group, if you're trying to bring about reconciliation within a family, the small group process is perfect. It can also be used to good advantage in small businesses, church groups, neighborhood groups, anywhere you need to develop an image of how to work together better or to mend relationships. Dialogue is, of course, another small group process that has been used very successfully in many different contexts around the world, generally to help people understand each other better in an effort to improve relationships. That alone, of course, is helpful in pursuing reconciliation, but more specifically, dialogue can be directed to help people visualize how they want to live together in the future. This picture was taken at a Seeds of Peace dialogue that was held in March 2009 in Shlomi in northern Israel. Seeds of Peace calls itself a leadership development program that brings together teenagers from both sides of conflict lines, Israelis and Palestinians mostly, but also Greek and Turkish Cypriots and teens from the Balkans have participated in Seeds of Peace programs. They live and work together and get to know each other over the period of a number of weeks. As the Seeds of Peace website explains, as participants find their own voices, form relationships, and gain insights into the root issues that divide them, they build greater levels of confidence, trust, respect, and empathy, which inspire their commitment to work for change at home. The description of this event explained that the group viewed the documentary, In October the Earth Shook, which describes the events surrounding the 2000 killing of Seed Asil Aslay by Israeli Peace in 2000. The screening was followed by an intense dialogue. The next day, the seminar focused on the wider Israeli-Palestinian conflict, beginning with the showing of another documentary and Counterpoint, followed by another dialogue session. Later, participants took part in a leadership activity. The event ended with a letter-writing session where Seeds addressed their Palestinian counterparts. That's all the detail I know, but I would imagine this being a leadership activity that the participants likely discussed how they would like to see the Israeli-Palestinian conflict evolve towards reconciliation, and how Seeds might work to help make this happen. Indeed, that's the purpose of the whole Seeds of Peace program. My skepticism about Seeds of Peace is whether and how the program can scale up to make a societal level difference in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But clearly, at the small group level at least, the program appears to have made a significant impact. Similar to dialogues are problem-solving workshops, also called interactive problem-solving, which are essentially dialogues designed to address fundamental human needs. These, too, can be applied at all levels, from interpersonal to international. Although at the interpersonal level it wouldn't be a workshop, it would just be an interpersonal investigation of each party's needs and a development of a plan to meet those needs. John Burton, if you remember, took Maslow's needs hierarchy and adopted it to conflict theory, arguing that the need for identity, security, and recognition were paramount, and when those needs weren't fulfilled, deep-rooted conflict was likely to occur. Burton's answer for resolving such conflicts, therefore, was using problem-solving workshops to identifying the missing needs and developing ideas, a pathway, essentially, of how to provide them to the disputants. The interesting thing about needs is that they're different from interests, in that needs are not zero-sum or win-lose. Interests aren't always zero-sum either, but sometimes they are. Sometimes there's a fixed amount of good or benefit, and it has to be divided up in a way that the more you have, the less I have. But Burton's needs don't work like that. The more security one side has, the less likely it is to feel a need to threaten the other side. So the other side will have more security too. If one side's identity is respected, they won't feel as much need to disrespect others. So respect is naturally a win-win commodity, such that it's a commodity at all. These ideas are true when you're talking about individual people. People need to feel safe, they need to feel respected for who they are, and they need to be recognized for their accomplishment. These needs apply to groups too, groups in communities, in organizations, and nations. So that's another similarity across levels. Our discussion of retrospective reconciliation was also primarily focused at the large scale. Truth and reconciliation commissions are a standard way for whole societies to reckon with what was wrong in the past. Typically, they're organized and run by top-level actors, either government or highly positioned non-governmental people, such as Archbishop Desmond Tutu in South Africa. What's the equivalent at the smaller scale, bottom-up domain? Well, first, Lederach's meeting place applies here too. If two friends or a couple are trying to reconcile after one has deeply wronged the other, or perhaps after they both had a contribution to the current estrangement, parties are still likely to want to know the truth of what happened, who did what, and why. They probably want some form of justice. It might be compensation for the damages incurred. It might be a heartfelt apology and a promise to do better. It might be some sort of restorative justice process that indeed seeks to understand the hurt and develop a consensual plan for remedying the situation and the relationship. The wrongdoer, likely, also wants mercy. They don't want to be dealt with overly harshly, and presumably, if the couple is working for something they call reconciliation, they'd also like to end up with what they'd call peace. TRCs can also be held at the local level, and in the United States there's reason to believe that local TRCs might work, while a national level one might not. This is the website of the first ever, to my knowledge, local TRC, which was held in Greensboro, North Carolina. It was an independent, democratically selected body, which is unusual, which sought truth and healing transformation, seeking to close deep wounds that were created in November of 1979, when the KKK and Nazi Party members attacked a racially mixed group of activists, killing 5 and wounding 10 others. According to George Mason's Mary Hoke Center document, Local Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, and other commissions, as of early 2021, 14 local jurisdictions and 28 college campuses have convened their own TRC-like processes seeking racial and ethnic healing in their communities. Although the centers have different names, some are TRCs, some are not, according to the Hoke Center, they all have the focus on truth-telling, atonement, racial reconciliation, healing, reparations, justice, and/or transformation. Under all the formulations, the focus is on overcoming a system of racism through honest examination of its history and trauma inflicted on communities. A related process that's undertaken at the interpersonal level is restorative justice, also sometimes called victim-offender reconciliation. This process brings victims of crimes, or sometimes other community members representing the victim, face to face with the perpetrators of the crime to explore what the harms were, the reasons for the offense, and what can be done to make amends. Apologies are a minimum response. Significant reparations are also common results, together with forgiveness of the crime and the offender if the apology and reparations are made. This kind of process is most commonly used in the United States for juvenile crimes, but it has been applied to adult crimes as well. Even at times, violent crimes, although it is more common for minor crimes such as vandalism and civic disturbances. In other countries, including particularly Canada, it is used for both adults and juveniles, and much more extensively. That's a quick overview of the most common methods used for what I call prospective and retrospective reconciliation at the interpersonal and local levels. Next, we'll talk about leveling the playing field.